the moment that changed everything. Let me ask you something honest. When was the last time someone made you feel small? Maybe it was yesterday. Maybe it was this morning. Maybe it's happening so regularly that you've started to normalize it. You've started to believe that this is just how people are, that this is just how life works, that maybe on some level you deserve it. You don't. Here's what nobody tells you about disrespect. It doesn't always arrive loudly. It doesn't always show up as yelling or name-calling or obvious cruelty. Most of the time, disrespect is quiet. It's the colleague who talks over you in every single meeting. It's the friend who cancels on you last minute, again, and expects you to smile and say, "No worries." It's the family member who dismisses your choices with a single raised eyebrow. It's the partner who makes you feel like your feelings are a burden. And here's the brutal truth. Every time you let it slide, every time you bite your tongue and look the other way, you're not keeping the peace. You're giving away a piece of yourself. This guide exists because you are done giving pieces of yourself away. What you're about to read isn't a collection of sharp comebacks or aggressive tactics. This isn't about becoming someone who picks fights or burns bridges. This is about something far more powerful. It's about becoming someone who simply doesn't attract disrespect in the first place. And when it does show up, handling it with such calm, steady strength that it never happens again. By the time you finish this, you will understand exactly why some people seem to effortlessly command respect in every room they walk into, while others spend years being overlooked, talked over, and undervalued. You'll understand the psychology behind why people test limits and how to shut those tests down immediately. Most importantly, you'll build the kind of unshakable inner foundation that makes respectful treatment feel less like something you have to fight for and more like something that simply follows you everywhere you go. This journey starts with one uncomfortable question. What has tolerating disrespect actually cost you? Chapter 1. The hidden price tag of accepting disrespect. Most people think disrespect hurts because it feels bad in the moment. They think it's about the sting of a dismissive comment or the frustration of being ignored. But that's only the surface. The real damage runs so much deeper, and it accumulates silently, like water seeping into a foundation until the whole structure is compromised. Think about a garden hose with a slow leak. On any given day, the leak seems insignificant. A few drops here, a little puddle there, but over weeks and months, the pressure drops. The plants don't get what they need. The garden starts to wither, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, quietly, surely. That's what tolerating disrespect does to you. It hollows out your confidence from the inside. Every time you stay silent when someone crosses a line, your subconscious registers it, not as "I was being patient" or "I was keeping the peace," but as evidence that you weren't worth defending. Your own mind starts building a case against you. And that internal case becomes the lens through which you see yourself, carry yourself, and present yourself to the world. People can feel that. They can sense the difference between someone who knows their worth and someone who's quietly unsure of it. And here's the uncomfortable reality. Disrespectful people are extraordinarily good at detecting that uncertainty. They're like heat-seeking missiles for self-doubt. Once they've found it in you, they'll return to it again and again because you've shown them, without saying a word, that it's safe to do so. It sends out an invisible signal. The moment you accept poor treatment without consequence, you broadcast a signal. This is acceptable here, and not just to the person who disrespected you, to everyone watching, because respect, or the lack of it, is never really a private matter. It plays out in how you hold your shoulders when someone interrupts you, in whether you speak up or go quiet, in whether you follow through on what you said you would do. Every interaction teaches the people around you what to expect from you. It costs you professionally in ways that are rarely discussed. In the workplace, the people who get overlooked for opportunities, who get their ideas stolen, who get talked over in meetings, they often assume it's because they lack talent or credentials. But frequently, it's something else entirely. It's that they've never made clear what treatment they expect, and so they've trained their environment to treat them as optional. It destroys the closest relationships you have. This is perhaps the most painful cost. When you allow someone you love, a partner, a sibling, a close friend, to treat you poorly without consequence, you're not protecting the relationship. You're slowly poisoning it. Resentment builds. You start walking on eggshells. You start performing emotions you don't feel. And eventually, one of two things happens. Either the relationship collapses under the weight of everything unsaid, or it survives but becomes a hollow version of what it could have been. Here's the shift that changes everything. Respect is not something you earn by being good enough. It is something you establish by making your standards unmistakably clear. People don't respect you because you're kind or talented or helpful. They respect you because you make it obvious through your choices, your responses, and your boundaries that you respect yourself enough to require better. When you start doing that, things change quickly. Some people will push back at first. That's normal, and we'll talk about how to handle it. Some people will quietly disappear from your life, and some, perhaps surprisingly, will rise to meet you. New people will show up. Better opportunities will follow, because the energy you carry when you know your worth is simply different. It opens doors that being endlessly accommodating never could. The cost of tolerating disrespect is your trajectory, professionally, relationally, emotionally. The reward of demanding respect is everything you've been working toward. Chapter 2. Recognizing disrespect in all its forms. Here's something that might surprise you. The most damaging forms of disrespect are the ones you almost don't notice. Most people can recognize the obvious stuff: being yelled at, publicly humiliated, openly insulted. Those moments are painful, but at least they're clear. You know exactly what happened. You know exactly how you feel about it. The harder problem is the disrespect that hides in plain sight. The kind that's so subtle, so wrapped in plausible deniability that it makes you question your own perception. The kind that has you lying awake at night thinking, am I overreacting? Am I being too sensitive? Maybe they didn't mean it that way. That's self-doubt. That's not a coincidence. That's the whole point. Subtle disrespect is specifically designed to leave you uncertain. Because as long as you're questioning yourself, you won't question them. So let's bring it into the light. Let's name it clearly so you can see it for exactly what it is. The constant interruption. This isn't about someone getting excited mid-conversation and accidentally cutting you off. That happens to everyone. What we're talking about is a pattern. Someone who consistently prevents you from completing your thoughts. They wait until you start speaking, then raise their voice just slightly, or they acknowledge what you said and immediately redirect the conversation as if you hadn't spoken at all. The message being sent, whether consciously or not, is simple. What you have to say doesn't matter as much as what I have to say. Over time, if you don't address it, you start believing that message yourself. The dismissive response. You share something that matters to you, a concern, an idea, a feeling, and the response you get is some version of, "You're overthinking it," or "That's not really a big deal," or "I don't see why you're upset." Notice what's happening there. They're not engaging with what you said. They're dismissing your right to have said it. They're not addressing your concern. They're erasing it. This pattern is particularly damaging in close relationships because it trains you to stop sharing. You start pre-editing yourself. You start wondering if your feelings are even worth mentioning. Time disrespect. Your time is a direct representation of your value. When someone is chronically late to plans with you, cancels at the last minute without genuine reason, or keeps you waiting while they finish something less important, they are communicating something about where you rank in their world. This one is easy to rationalize away. They're just busy. They don't mean anything by it. But patterns don't lie. 1 late arrival is a circumstance. 12 late arrivals is a statement. The exclusion pattern, being left out of conversations, decisions, or events that you reasonably should be part of, and then being told it was just an oversight. Once, maybe. Twice, possibly. But when it keeps happening, it's not an oversight anymore. It's a deliberate arrangement of the social landscape that places you on the outside. In professional settings, this is particularly powerful as a control mechanism. Whoever controls information controls power. If you're consistently the last to know, that's not accidental. Micro-invalidations. These are the small, repeated moments where someone subtly signals that they don't fully trust your competence or judgment. They double-check your work when they don't do the same for anyone else. They explain things to you that they'd never explain to a peer. They ask, "Are you sure?" in a tone that implies they already doubt your answer. Individually, each incident seems minor, barely worth mentioning, but cumulatively, the effect is to position you as less capable, less reliable, less worthy of being taken at face value. And if it goes on long enough, you start performing that role. Credit theft. Someone takes your idea, presents it as their own, and receives the recognition that was rightfully yours. This happens in boardrooms and in bedrooms. It happens between colleagues and between friends. And it's devastating not just because it's unfair, but because it directly undermines your standing in the spaces where your contributions should be building your reputation. The patronizing tone. You know this one when you hear it. The slightly too slow explanation. The condescending patience in someone's voice when they're responding to something you said. The way they frame their responses as though they're a professor and you're a struggling student, regardless of your actual knowledge or experience. This tone is a power move. It establishes a hierarchy in the conversation that was never agreed upon. Physical and digital boundary violations. Disrespect doesn't only live in words. Someone who stands too close when you've shown discomfort. Someone who touches you without reading the room. In digital spaces, the colleague who responds instantly to everyone else's messages but leaves yours on read for days. the friend who likes every post except yours. These aren't coincidences. They're signals, and they deserve to be recognized as such. Here's your most important tool for recognizing disrespect. Trust your nervous system before you trust their explanation. If you consistently feel tense, deflated, or vaguely invisible after interacting with someone, that feeling is data. Don't argue yourself out of it. Don't wait for a moment so obvious that no one could deny it. Start paying attention to patterns rather than individual incidents. Document them if you need to, because patterns don't require a smoking gun. They require your honest attention. And remember this, intent is not the same as impact. Someone doesn't have to mean to disrespect you for the disrespect to be real and to require a response. What matters is the consistent effect on you and what you choose to do about it. Chapter 3. The Psychology Behind Why People Disrespect You. Before we talk about how to respond to disrespect, we need to talk about something most people skip entirely: why it happens in the first place. Because here's the thing that will genuinely change how you see these situations. Disrespect is never really about you. It feels personal. It lands personally. But at its root, it is always, without exception, a window into the other person's inner world. And when you understand what you're actually looking at through that window, you stop reacting emotionally and start responding strategically. Let's walk through the real psychology behind why people behave this way. Insecurity, wearing a mask. The most common driver of disrespectful behavior is insecurity, and it almost never looks like insecurity from the outside. It looks like arrogance. It looks like dismissiveness. It looks like someone who has all the answers and no patience for yours. But underneath that performance is someone who feels deeply uncertain about their own value, and the way they manage that uncertainty is by diminishing others. If they can make you seem less capable, less credible, less worthy, even subtly, it temporarily relieves the pressure of their own self-doubt. Think of it like a seesaw. They can only feel higher if they push someone else lower. When you understand this, something powerful shifts. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What are they afraid of?" That question gives you clarity, and clarity gives you power. The boundary testing instinct. Some people test boundaries the way a contractor tests walls. They're looking for weak spots. This isn't always conscious or malicious. It's often just an ingrained pattern, developed over years of learning that pushing gets results. They push a little. If nothing happens, they push a little more. If still nothing happens, they push harder. This is why your first response to boundary testing behavior is so critical. Think of it like setting a thermostat. Whatever temperature you allow in the very beginning becomes the baseline. Once that baseline is established, changing it requires significantly more effort than getting it right from the start. The moment you let something slide just this once, you've moved the thermostat, and the other person now knows where the new setting is. Power dynamics and the zero-sum mindset. Some people genuinely believe that respect is a limited resource, that for them to have it, others must have less. This zero-sum thinking is especially common in competitive environments. Certain workplaces, certain families, certain social circles where status is constantly being negotiated. For these individuals, disrespecting you isn't just a side effect of their behavior, it's the strategy. It's how they maintain their position in the hierarchy they've constructed in their mind. Understanding this doesn't mean accepting it. It means recognizing that their disrespect is a tactic, not a verdict, and tactics can be countered. Learned patterns. From early life, many people who treat others poorly aren't doing so from a place of calculated cruelty. They're doing it because it's what they learned. If someone grew up in a home where dismissiveness was normal, where feelings were regularly invalidated, where interrupting was just how people communicated, then that's the template they're working from. They're not aware it's a template. To them, it's just how relationships work. This context matters not because it excuses the behavior. It doesn't. But because it helps you stop taking it as a personal commentary on your worth. They would treat almost anyone this way. You just happen to be the person in front of them right now. Control as a coping mechanism. When people feel out of control in their own lives, overwhelmed at work, anxious about their future, uncertain in their relationships, they often compensate by trying to control the people around them. Disrespect becomes a tool for that control. They interrupt to control the conversation. They dismiss your ideas to control the outcome of a decision. They violate your time to control your schedule and remind themselves that they have influence somewhere, even if they feel powerless everywhere else. Recognizing disrespect as a control mechanism immediately changes your approach. You're no longer dealing with someone who thinks less of you. You're dealing with someone who is quietly falling apart and reaching for whatever lever is available. Narcissistic entitlement. Then there are people who genuinely believe the world operates with them at the center, not as a performance, as a sincere worldview. They interrupt because they assume their thoughts are more valuable. They dismiss your feelings because they find it genuinely difficult to believe that other people's inner experiences deserve equal weight. They take credit because, in their version of events, the good outcomes are naturally connected to them. You cannot reach these people through appeals to empathy. That's not a road that leads anywhere useful. What they do respond to is consistency, consequences, and the clear communication that their behavior will not produce the outcome they're looking for. Stress and the survival brain. Here's a more compassionate angle worth keeping. Sometimes people who are normally decent become temporarily disrespectful under extreme stress. When someone is in survival mode, facing a health crisis, a financial emergency, a collapsing relationship, their capacity for empathy and consideration shrinks dramatically. They become short, dismissive, inconsiderate, not because they've decided you don't matter, but because their nervous system has narrowed its focus to the immediate threat. This doesn't mean you absorb the fallout, but it does mean that occasional behavior from someone with a strong track record might warrant a different response than chronic behavior from someone with a consistent pattern. What this all means for you. Understanding the psychology behind disrespect gives you something invaluable: emotional distance. When you know that someone's behavior toward you is driven by their insecurity, their control issues, their learned patterns, or their stress response, you stop receiving it as a message about your worth. You start receiving it as information about their state, and information you can work with. You don't need to become their therapist. You don't need to fix them or forgive them before you're ready. You just need to understand what you're actually dealing with, so that when it's time to respond, you respond to the reality of the situation rather than the story your emotions are telling you about it. Chapter 4. Setting immediate boundaries when disrespect occurs. There is a window of opportunity that opens the moment disrespect happens. It stays open for only a short time, and what you do or don't do in that window determines everything that follows. Most people let it close. They tell themselves they'll address it later. They convince themselves that bringing it up will make things awkward. They rationalize that maybe it wasn't that bad, that maybe they're being too sensitive, that maybe if they just let it go this time, the other person will somehow figure it out on their own. But here's what actually happens when you let that window close. The other person receives a clear message, not the message you intended, not "I'm being gracious" or "I'm choosing my battles." The message they receive is, "This is acceptable." And the next time they're deciding whether to test that boundary again, they'll remember that nothing happened last time, so they'll push a little further. Delayed responses to disrespect don't preserve relationships. They preserve the conditions that allow disrespect to thrive. Why immediate response is so powerful. When you address disrespect in the moment, you do three things simultaneously. First, you interrupt the pattern before it can solidify into an expectation. Second, you signal to everyone present, including yourself, that you operate according to clear standards. Third, and perhaps most importantly, you protect your own self-respect in real time rather than spending the next 3 days replaying the moment and wishing you'd said something. That third point matters more than most people realize. Every time you speak up for yourself immediately, you send a message to your own subconscious. I am worth defending right now, not later. That message accumulates. It builds the kind of internal confidence that eventually makes boundary setting feel natural rather than terrifying. The non-negotiable requirement: stay calm. Before we get into specific language and situations, we need to establish the most important rule of immediate boundary setting. Your emotional state is your most powerful asset, and you cannot afford to waste it on reactivity. If you respond to disrespect with anger, tears, or visible agitation, even when those reactions are completely justified, you hand the other person an enormous advantage. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about their behavior. It's about your reaction. They get to reframe themselves as the reasonable one and you as the unstable one. They get to say, "I was just making a comment. I didn't realize you'd react like this." And now you're on the defensive. Calm is not passivity. Calm is precision. Think of it like a surgeon's steady hand. The steadiness isn't indifference to what's happening on the table. It's the thing that makes the work effective. When you respond to disrespect with quiet, steady, direct firmness, you keep the spotlight exactly where it belongs. On what they did, on what needs to change, on the standard you hold, for being interrupted or talked over. This is one of the most common forms of workplace and social disrespect, and most people handle it by either going silent or trying to talk louder, neither of which works. Instead, stop speaking the moment they interrupt. Make calm, direct eye contact. Then say clearly, "I wasn't finished." Not, "Sorry, can I just finish?" Not, "I was kinda still talking, if that's okay." Just, "I wasn't finished." If they continue, add, "I'll finish my thought, and then I'd like to hear yours." Then keep speaking. Don't rush. Don't apologize for the pause. The pause itself communicates something important, that you are comfortable taking up space, and you will not be rushed out of it for dismissiveness about your ideas or feelings. When someone responds to what you shared with minimizing language, you're overthinking it. That's not a big deal. I don't see why you're upset. Resist the urge to defend your feelings. The moment you start justifying why your feelings are valid, you've accepted the frame that they were in question in the first place. Instead, hold your ground simply. My perspective on this is valid and it needs to be considered. Or, in a professional setting, I have direct experience with this and my input needs to be part of this conversation. You're not asking for permission to have a viewpoint. You're stating that you have one and it matters. For a time, disrespect. If someone is chronically late to plans with you, the next time it happens, do not wait indefinitely. Give a reasonable window, 15 minutes, and then proceed with your plans without them when they arrive or reach out. Keep your tone neutral and factual. I had to move ahead. I wasn't able to wait. Let me know when you'd like to reschedule, and I'll see what works. You're not punishing them dramatically. You're simply allowing your time to have the value it deserves. That demonstration is worth more than any speech about punctuality. For last-minute cancellations, stop immediately offering alternative times. Let them sit with the gap they created. When they ask to reschedule, you might say, "Last-minute changes make it hard for me to plan around. What works on your end, and I'll let you know if I can make it work on mine." The balance of effort has just shifted. For credit theft, if someone presents your idea as their own in a meeting or group setting, address it immediately and publicly, but without hostility. Actually, that's the direction I proposed in our conversation last Tuesday. I'm glad it's getting traction. Calm, factual, unchallenging in tone, but completely clear in content. Don't save this for a private conversation later. The theft happened publicly. The correction needs to happen publicly, not as an attack, but as a simple restoration of the record. The language that works and the language that doesn't. There's a distinct difference between language that sets a boundary and language that requests one. Compare these. It would be really helpful if maybe you could try not to interrupt me so much. This is a request wrapped in apology. It signals uncertainty. It invites negotiation. I need you to let me finish before you respond. This is a boundary. It's clear, direct, and non-negotiable in its framing. Remove these words from your boundary-setting vocabulary. Maybe, I feel like, kind of, if that's okay, sorry, but. These words don't soften your message, they dissolve it. Replace them with, I need, I expect. That's not acceptable. Here's what needs to happen. Your body is part of the message. Your words can be perfect and completely undermined by your body language. Stand or sit upright. Make eye contact, not aggressively, just steadily. Keep your voice at a consistent volume. Don't drop it at the end of sentences as though you're hoping they won't quite hear. Don't smile apologetically. Don't laugh nervously. Your body and your words need to be telling the same story. That story is, I know what I'm saying, I mean what I'm saying, and I'm entirely comfortable saying it. Expect pushback and welcome. When you start setting immediate boundaries with people who haven't experienced them from you before, some will push back. They'll escalate. They'll accuse you of being dramatic or oversensitive. They might sulk or become hostile. This is not evidence that you did something wrong. This is evidence that the boundary landed. When someone pushes back against a limit you set, they're confirming that they felt it. which means it was real and it was necessary. Stay consistent. Don't retract the boundary because their reaction made you uncomfortable. Don't over-explain or justify at length. Brief is better. I understand you see it differently. This is still where I stand. Every time you hold a boundary under pressure, you build a kind of internal credibility with yourself that no external validation can replicate. You prove to yourself that your standards are real. And that proof is the foundation of everything else we're going to build together. Chapter 5. Strategic Responses for Different Types of Disrespectful People. Not all disrespect comes from the same place, and not all disrespectful people respond to the same approach. This is where a lot of well-intentioned advice falls apart. People read about setting boundaries. They practice their firm language. They steel themselves for the conversation. And then they use the exact same approach on every single person, regardless of who that person is or what's driving their behavior. Sometimes it works. Often it doesn't. And when it doesn't, they conclude that boundary setting must not work for them specifically, when the real issue is that they brought a hammer to a situation that needed a scalpel. Different personalities require different strategies. Learning to identify which type of person you're dealing with quickly and accurately is one of the most practically valuable skills you can develop. So let's break them down. Type 1. The aggressive intimidator. You know this person. They use volume, intensity, and physical presence as tools. They've discovered, probably early in life, that when they turn up the heat, most people back down. So they keep doing it. Their aggression isn't usually about you personally. It's a strategy that has worked for them, and they're applying it because they expect it to work again. The single worst thing you can do with an aggressive intimidator is match their energy. The moment you raise your voice, get visibly flustered, or become defensive, you've stepped into their arena. And in their arena, they always win, because they've had more practice there than you have. Instead, do the opposite of what they expect. Lower your voice. Slow your speech. Maintain steady eye contact without blinking aggressively or looking away submissively, just a calm, level gaze. Then say something like, "I hear that you're frustrated. When you're ready to continue this conversation respectfully, I'm here for that." Then stop talking. Let the silence sit. What you're doing here is refusing to provide the conflict they're seeking. Aggressive intimidators feed on escalation. When you don't escalate, when you remain visibly unmoved, their strategy loses its power completely. Most will recalibrate. Some will walk away. Either outcome is a win for you. The non-negotiable rule with aggressive intimidators: never reward their aggression by giving them what they want while they're being hostile. If you comply under pressure, you teach them that the pressure works, and you will see it again. Type 2. The passive-aggressive manipulator. This is arguably the most frustrating type to deal with because their disrespect is covert. It lives in the sarcastic comment followed by, "I was just joking." In the task they conveniently forgot. In the backhanded compliment that leaves you feeling vaguely insulted but unable to say exactly why. In the heavy silence that fills a room but can always be explained away as just being tired. The passive-aggressive manipulator has built their entire approach around plausible deniability. They rely on you feeling confused about whether what just happened actually happened. And as long as you stay in that confusion, they're in control. Your most effective weapon here is radical directness. Name what you observe, calmly and specifically, and request a direct response. When they make a sarcastic comment, "That came across as sarcastic to me. What did you actually mean by that?" When they go silent after a disagreement, "I notice you've stopped responding. I'd like to resolve this. Are you willing to talk about it directly?" When they forget something important for the third time, "This is a pattern I've noticed. What can we put in place so it doesn't keep happening?" You're not accusing them. You're not losing your temper. You're simply refusing to participate in the fog they've created. You're dragging the conversation into the light. Where indirect tactics don't work anymore, most passive-aggressive people find direct confrontation deeply uncomfortable, which is precisely why they avoid it. Your willingness to go there calmly and consistently removes their primary tool. Type 3. The narcissistic controller. This person genuinely believes the room exists for them. They interrupt because they assume their thoughts are more valuable. They dismiss your contributions because they're already certain they have the best answer. They take credit because, in their mental map of events, good outcomes naturally flow from them. Here's the critical thing to understand about narcissistic controllers. Appealing to their empathy will not work. Explaining how their behavior makes you feel will not work. In fact, it often backfires. Giving them emotional information they'll use strategically. They don't relate to the feelings framework the way most people do. What they do respond to is power, consistency, and consequences. When they interrupt, "Hold on, I'm not done," then continue speaking without asking for their permission to do so. When they take credit for your work, "That was my proposal from the third. Glad it's landing well." Factual, calm, traceable. When they push past a limit you've set, state the consequence clearly and follow through immediately. "If you interrupt me again, I'm going to end this meeting and we'll reschedule." Then if they do it, end the meeting. No extended warning. No second chance that erodes the first. Narcissistic controllers respect power because power is their primary language. Show them through consistent action that you speak it fluently. Type 4. The insecure competitor. This person treats every conversation as a competition they need to win. They one-up your stories. They subtly undercut your achievements. They introduce doubt about your competence in front of others, not through overt attack, but through carefully placed questions. Are you sure that's the right approach? Has anyone reviewed that? Their behavior stems entirely from their own deep insecurity about their standing and value. They're not actually threatened by your performance. They're threatened by how your performance makes them feel about themselves. The most powerful response to an insecure competitor is to refuse to compete. Full stop. When they one-up you, simply acknowledge their comment without taking the bait. Interesting. Anyway, what I was saying was, when they cast doubt on your competence publicly, respond with quiet confidence. "I've been working in this area for several years, so I'm comfortable with the direction." No defensiveness, no counterattack, just steady self-assurance that doesn't need their validation to exist. The moment you start trying to outcompete them, you've lost because you're playing their game, and their game was designed to keep you chasing something that never arrives. Stay out of it entirely. Type 5. The boundary tester. Unlike the other types, the boundary tester isn't necessarily malicious. They've simply learned, through years of experience, that persistence pays off. They push gently at first. If they find resistance, they might back off momentarily, but they'll return to that same spot later in a different way to test whether the resistance is still there. With boundary testers, one thing matters above everything else: consistency, not intensity, not anger, not lengthy explanations of why your boundaries exist. Consistency. If you say meetings start at 10 a.m., start at 10 a.m., whether they're there or not. If you say you need 48 hours, notice for schedule changes. Don't accommodate the last-minute request just this once. If you say you don't take work calls after 7 p.m., don't pick up at 7:15 because the situation seems important. Every exception you make teaches a boundary tester that your boundaries are actually just suggestions, that the real limit is somewhere further than you stated. They just need to keep looking for it. Your consistency is the message. It says, this is real, this is permanent, and finding the edge of it is not a productive use of your energy. Type 6. The emotional manipulator. This person has learned to use emotional intensity as a shield. When confronted, they cry. When held accountable, they claim victimhood. When you set a limit, they make the conversation about their pain rather than about their behavior. They've discovered that most people will immediately back down when faced with visible distress. And so, distress has become their default tool for avoiding accountability. Your approach here requires one critical skill: separating their emotional state from the actual issue at hand. You can acknowledge how they feel without allowing that feeling to derail the conversation. I can see this is bringing up a lot for you, and I do care about that, and we still need to talk about what happened. Notice the "and" rather than "but." But erases the empathy you just expressed, and holds both things simultaneously: their emotional experience and the standard that still needs to be upheld. Stay on the specific behavior. Return to it gently but consistently, regardless of what emotional weather system moves through the conversation. Their feelings are real and worth acknowledging. They are not, however, a reason to abandon the conversation. Chapter 6. The Power of Strategic Withdrawal. There's a move that almost nobody talks about when the subject of handling disrespect comes up. It's not a comeback. It's not a confrontation. It's not a firmly worded conversation or a carefully set boundary. It's the deliberate, conscious decision to remove yourself. Not dramatically, not in anger, not as a punishment designed to make the other person feel bad, but as a quiet, intentional act of self-preservation. A recognition that your energy, your attention, and your presence are valuable resources that deserve to be invested wisely, and that some people have demonstrated clearly and repeatedly that they are not worthy recipients of those resources. This is strategic withdrawal, and when used correctly, it is one of the most powerful tools available to you. Why most people struggle with this? The resistance to withdrawal runs deep. Most of us were raised with messages, spoken or unspoken, that walking away is weakness, that staying and fighting is character, that leaving means the other person won, that if you care enough, you'll find a way to make it work. These beliefs are not just unhelpful. In the context of chronic disrespect, they are genuinely harmful, because they keep you in situations that are slowly eroding your confidence, your energy, and your sense of self, while convincing you that your willingness to stay is a virtue rather than a vulnerability. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Walking away from someone who consistently disrespects you is not weakness. It is the most direct possible demonstration that you value yourself more than you value their approval. Strategic withdrawal is not giving up. It is taking back what strategic withdrawal actually looks like. Strategic withdrawal is not slamming doors and sending angry final texts. It's not a performance. It doesn't need an audience or a dramatic exit speech. In professional settings, it might look like limiting your interactions with a particular colleague to written communication only, not as a punishment, but because written communication removes the opportunity for them to interrupt, dismiss, or intimidate you in real time. It creates a record. It gives you time to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. It quietly removes the conditions under which their disrespect flourishes. It might look like stopping the informal collaboration. No more sharing ideas in casual hallway conversations with the person who consistently takes credit for them. No more volunteering for projects that require close partnership with someone who routinely undermines you. You remain professionally courteous, warm even, but completely unavailable for anything beyond what's formally required. In personal relationships, strategic withdrawal looks like reducing the frequency of contact, declining invitations without lengthy explanation, stopping the practice of sharing your most vulnerable thoughts and feelings with someone who has shown they can't be trusted with them. Not dramatically, not coldly, just quietly redirecting your energy toward people who actually receive it well. The timing question. Strategic withdrawal is not a first response. It belongs in your toolkit as a consequence of a pattern that has continued despite your attempts to address it directly. Think of it as a graduated response. First, you name the behavior and address it immediately. Then, if it continues, you have a more direct conversation about the pattern and what needs to change. Then, if nothing changes, you begin withdrawing your availability and investment, starting gradually, increasing as the behavior continues. This sequence matters because it keeps you in integrity. You're not cutting people off without warning. You're not disappearing without giving them the opportunity to understand what's happening and choose differently. Strategic withdrawal, when it comes after clear communication, is not a punishment. It's a natural consequence that the other person's continued behavior has created. Prepare for the response. When people notice you pulling back, and they will notice, they will respond in one of a few predictable ways. Some will escalate. They'll become louder, more demanding, more insistent. They'll push harder precisely because they can feel the leverage they've had over you starting to slip. This is uncomfortable, but it's actually a sign that your withdrawal is working. Stay steady. Don't let their escalation pull you back in. Some will turn to guilt and manipulation. I can't believe you're doing this. After everything we've been through, you're being so dramatic. This is simply another version of the same dynamic you've been dealing with all along. An attempt to use your emotions against you to produce the behavior they want from you. Acknowledge the feeling if you genuinely want to. Don't let it change your course. And some, perhaps the ones you least expected, will actually reflect. They'll come back differently, quieter, more genuine, with something that looks like actual accountability rather than just damage control. This is where you need to be careful, because the relief of having someone finally show up the way you needed them to can be so powerful that you rush back to full engagement before anything has genuinely changed. Don't. Real change takes time to demonstrate. It requires consistent different behavior across multiple interactions over an extended period, not just one good conversation when they felt your absence and panicked. Let them show you. Don't let the promise of change be enough. When withdrawal becomes permanent, sometimes strategic withdrawal leads you to a place of complete clarity. This relationship is not going to serve your well-being regardless of how long you wait or how many chances you extend. Some people are genuinely unable or unwilling to meet the standard of basic respect, and the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself, and arguably for them, is to stop participating in a dynamic that isn't working for either of you. Permanent separation from a chronically disrespectful person is not a failure. It is the completion of a process. You communicated, you gave time, you held your boundaries, and ultimately you made the decision that your mental and emotional health are worth more than the history you share with this person. That decision will sometimes come with grief. It might come with guilt. It will almost certainly come with the judgment of people who don't understand why you made it. Feel all of that and make the decision anyway. The unexpected gift of withdrawal. Here's what most people don't anticipate until they experience it. The moment you genuinely stop investing in a relationship that has been draining you, something opens up. Space appears in your schedule, in your emotional bandwidth, in your sense of who you are when you're not managing someone else's behavior. Into that space, almost without effort, better things begin to arrive. Better people who meet you with genuine warmth and reciprocity. Opportunities that were always there but invisible because your attention was consumed elsewhere. A version of yourself that you'd almost forgotten existed. The one who isn't constantly braced for the next disappointment. Strategic withdrawal at its deepest level is not about the person you're stepping back from. It's about the life you're stepping toward. And that life has been waiting for you to create the room for it. Chapter 7. Building Unshakable Inner Confidence that commands respect. Let's talk about something that most people in the personal development space get fundamentally wrong about confidence. They treat it like a performance, like something you put on before you walk into a room, like a costume assembled from power poses, rehearsed affirmations, and carefully chosen outfits. And while none of those things are inherently wrong, they all share the same critical flaw. They're built on the outside, which means the moment external conditions shift, the moment someone challenges you, dismisses you, or simply looks at you the wrong way, the whole structure wobbles. Real confidence doesn't wobble, not because it's rigid, but because it's rooted. And the difference between performed confidence and rooted confidence is the single most important distinction in this entire guide. Because all the boundary-setting language in the world, all the strategic withdrawal in the world, all the psychological understanding in the world, none of it works sustainably without this foundation underneath it. So let's build it properly. The difference between self-esteem and self-respect. These two things are often used interchangeably, but they are not the same. And understanding the difference will clarify more about your relationship with confidence than almost anything else. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself. It fluctuates. It rises when things go well, when people approve of you, when you achieve something meaningful. It drops when you fail, when someone criticizes you, when a relationship falls apart. Self-esteem is real and it matters, but it is inherently unstable because it's tied to circumstances you don't fully control. Self-respect is how you treat yourself. It is a practice, not a feeling. It shows up in whether you keep the promises you make to yourself, in whether you enforce the boundaries you set, in whether you speak up when something matters to you, even when it's uncomfortable, in whether you invest your time and energy in things and people that actually deserve them. Self-respect doesn't fluctuate with circumstances because it's not dependent on them. It's a standard you hold for yourself regardless of what's happening around you. And here's the remarkable thing. When you build genuine self-respect, self-esteem follows because you're constantly generating evidence that you are someone worth believing in. The internal locus of control psychologists use this term to describe the degree to which you believe you have influence over your own life. People with a strong internal locus of control believe that their choices, actions, and responses shape their experience. People with an external locus of control believe that their life is primarily determined by other people's decisions, luck, or circumstances beyond their reach. This distinction is everything when it comes to confidence and respect. If you operate from an external locus of control, you will always be waiting for someone to treat you better, waiting for circumstances to improve, waiting for permission to feel good about yourself. And that waiting position signals to everyone around you, including the people most likely to take advantage of it, that you are available to be moved around rather than someone who moves with intention. Shifting to an internal locus of control starts with a simple but radical question. Given this situation, what can I actually do? Not what should the other person do differently? Not what would be fair? What can you do right now with what you have? That question puts the steering wheel back in your hands. And the feeling of having the steering wheel, even in difficult situations, is the bedrock of real confidence. Stop seeking validation before feeling valid. Here's a habit that quietly destroys confidence in ways most people never trace back to its source. The pattern of needing external confirmation before feeling good about your own decisions and perceptions. You make a decision and immediately scan the faces around you to see if people approve. You share an opinion and then quickly soften it or retract it if someone pushes back. You experience something that upsets you and then spend hours wondering if you're allowed to be upset, as if your feelings need to pass a committee review before they're legitimate. This pattern isn't weakness. It's usually a learned behavior, something that developed in environments where your perceptions were regularly questioned or where approval felt like a survival requirement. But continuing it in your adult life keeps you permanently tethered to other people's assessments of your reality. The practice of releasing this habit starts small. Make a decision, even a minor one, and commit to it without soliciting opinions. Notice how it feels. When someone questions your perception of an experience, pause before immediately second-guessing yourself. Ask, do I actually believe they're right? Or am I just uncomfortable with the friction of disagreement? Each time you trust your own judgment and it holds up, and it will far more often than your self-doubt predicts, you build a small piece of internal evidence. Over time, that evidence becomes a case, and that case becomes confidence. Competence is confidence, There is no shortcut around this one. One of the most reliable sources of genuine confidence is simply being good at things that matter to you. Not perfect, not the best in the world, just genuinely capable. Someone who has put in the time, developed real skills, and can look at a challenge in their field and think, I know how to approach this. That knowledge doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It shows up in how you speak about your work, with specificity, rather than hedging, in how you respond to challenges, with curiosity rather than panic, in how you handle being questioned, with openness rather than defensiveness, because you're secure enough in what you know to engage with what you don't yet know. If there are areas of your life where you feel chronically underconfident, look honestly at whether you've actually invested in developing competence there. Sometimes the confidence gap is not a mindset problem, it's a skills gap. And the solution is practice, not affirmation. Your body shapes your mind. The relationship between physical presence and psychological confidence runs in both directions. Most people know that confidence affects how you carry yourself. What fewer people realize is that how you carry yourself actively shapes how confident you feel. This is not metaphor, it's neuroscience. Your posture, your breathing, your eye contact, your vocal patterns. These things send signals not just to the people around you, but to your own nervous system. Slouching, shallow breathing, and downward gaze all activate neural patterns associated with submissiveness and low status. Upright posture, steady breathing, and level eye contact do the opposite. You don't have to wait until you feel confident to carry yourself confidently. You can carry yourself confidently as a practice and let the feeling follow the behavior. Stand as though you belong in the room you're in because you do. Speak at a volume that assumes you're worth hearing because you are. Move without apologizing for the space you occupy because that space is yours. Over time, this stops being a practice and starts being simply who you are. The conversation inside your head, your internal dialogue, is either your greatest ally or your most persistent adversary. And for most people who struggle with confidence, it has become the latter. A running commentary that highlights every mistake, anticipates every rejection, and frames every challenge as evidence of inadequacy. This voice didn't appear randomly. It was constructed from the messages you received, from caregivers, from peers, from early experiences of failure or rejection. It learned to sound like truth because it was installed so early, before you had the tools to evaluate it critically. But it is not truth, it is a habit, and habits can be changed. Start by simply noticing the voice without immediately believing it. When it says, they probably think you're not good enough, pause. Ask, what's the actual evidence for that? What evidence exists that contradicts it? You're not trying to replace the negative thought with a forced positive one. You're just introducing the practice of examining the thought rather than automatically accepting it as fact. Over time, this examination becomes faster and more automatic. The voice doesn't disappear, but it loses its authority. And in that space where it used to have the final word, your own more accurate, more compassionate assessment starts to emerge. Confidence is a direction, not a destination. Perhaps the most liberating thing you can understand about confidence is that it is not a state you arrive at and then maintain effortlessly. It is a direction you move in, consistently, imperfectly, with better days and harder days, but always moving. There will be interactions that shake you. There will be moments where you wish you'd spoken up and didn't. There will be days where the old self-doubt feels louder than everything you've built. That's not failure. That's the reality of being human in a complicated world. What matters is not that those moments don't happen. What matters is that they no longer define you, that you return to yourself faster than you used to, that the foundation holds even when the surface gets choppy. Because that foundation, built from self-respect, from competence, from honest self-awareness, from a body and mind that have practiced showing up fully, is the thing that makes everything else in this guide not just possible, but inevitable. When you are genuinely rooted in your own worth, respect stops being something you have to pursue. It becomes something you simply carry with you everywhere you go. Chapter 8. Handling Disrespect in Family Relationships. Of all the places disrespect can live, family is where it cuts deepest. Because family isn't just a relationship, it's a history. It's the first place you ever learned what love feels like, what safety feels like, what you're worth. And when disrespect is woven into that history, when it started before you were old enough to recognize it, let alone name it or resist it, it becomes something far more complicated than a boundary problem. It becomes part of the story you tell about yourself. This is why so many people who are remarkably effective at handling disrespect in professional settings, in friendships, in romantic relationships, completely fall apart when it comes to family. It's not weakness. It's not a lack of self-awareness. It's the sheer weight of history pressing down on every interaction, making what should be simple feel impossibly tangled. So let's untangle it, carefully, honestly, without pretending it's easy. The myths that keep you stuck, before we talk about what to do, we need to dismantle what's stopping you from doing it. Because the barriers to addressing family disrespect are less about strategy and more about the stories you've absorbed about what family means and what loyalty requires. You know these stories. You've heard them your whole life. Blood is thicker than water. They're family. You have to forgive them. That's just how they are. They didn't mean it that way. You're too sensitive. Think about what this would do to the family. These narratives aren't entirely without value. Family relationships do deserve more patience and more investment than casual connections. History does matter. Context does matter. But these stories become toxic when they're used by others or by yourself to justify ongoing mistreatment. When "that's just how they are" becomes a reason to keep absorbing behavior that would be unacceptable from anyone else, the narrative has stopped protecting the relationship and started protecting the dysfunction. Here is the truth that cuts through all of it. Being related to someone does not give them permission to treat you poorly. Love, real love, is not incompatible with boundaries. In fact, the healthiest family relationships are the ones where both things exist simultaneously: genuine care and genuine standards. The specific forms family disrespect takes. Family disrespect has its own particular flavor, shaped by the unique dynamics of relationships built on history, obligation, and emotional dependency. Emotional manipulation is perhaps the most common. It lives in phrases designed to weaponize your love against you. After everything I've sacrificed for you, I thought we were closer than this. If you really cared about this family, you wouldn't do this. These statements are not expressions of hurt. They are levers. They're designed to move you back into compliance by making the cost of having standards feel like betrayal. Gaslighting about shared history is another particularly disorienting form. That never happened. You're remembering it wrong. You were always too sensitive, even as a kid. When someone rewrites the past in ways that erase your experience, they're not just being inaccurate, they're undermining your ability to trust your own perception of reality. And in family systems, where the shared narrative carries so much weight, this can be deeply destabilizing. Boundary violations disguised as love are everywhere in family dynamics. The parent who shows up unannounced because "I just wanted to see you." Is that a crime? The sibling who shares your personal information with other family members because "we don't have secrets in this family." The relative who offers unsolicited opinions on your career, your relationships, your parenting, your body, and frames every intrusion as concern. The comparison trap is another chronic source of family disrespect. Being measured against a sibling, a cousin, a neighbor's child, and consistently coming up short in the telling. This behavior maintains family hierarchies and keeps certain members in positions of subordination. It says, "You are not quite enough on your own terms." And if you hear it long enough, from early enough, you start to believe it. Separating love from tolerance. The most important conceptual shift you can make when it comes to family disrespect is this. You can love someone completely and still refuse to tolerate their behavior. These two things are not in conflict. In fact, refusing to tolerate disrespect from someone you love is often a more honest expression of love than endless accommodation, because accommodation without limit breeds resentment. And resentment, accumulated quietly over years, is what actually destroys family relationships. Not the conversation you were afraid to have. When you set a boundary with a family member, you are not attacking the relationship. You are attempting to create conditions under which a genuine relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than one person's tolerance of the other's behavior, can actually exist. How to address it, practically and directly, start by identifying the specific behavior that needs to change. Not the general feeling of being disrespected, the actual concrete behavior. You make dismissive comments about my career choices in front of other people. Not, "You never support me." Specific is actionable. General is just an argument waiting to happen. When you're ready to address it, choose your moment carefully, not in the middle of a family gathering, not in the heat of an argument that's already escalated. Find a calm moment or create one when both of you have the emotional bandwidth for a real conversation. Then communicate directly, without lengthy preamble or excessive justification. "I need to talk to you about something." When you make comments about my career choices, like what happened at dinner last Sunday, it feels dismissive, and it's something I need you to stop. If you have genuine concerns, I'm open to hearing them privately and respectfully. But the public commentary needs to end. Notice what that does and doesn't include. It names the specific behavior. It gives a concrete example. It states clearly what needs to change. It leaves a door open for genuine connection. It does not beg, apologize for raising it, or invite a debate about whether the behavior actually occurred. Expect the extinction burst. In psychology, there's a phenomenon called the extinction burst. When a behavior that has worked for someone is suddenly no longer working, they initially intensify it before giving it up. It's the behavioral equivalent of pushing a button harder when it stops responding. When you start setting boundaries with family members who aren't used to experiencing them from you, expect the extinction burst. They will push harder. They will be louder, more manipulative, more dramatic. They might recruit other family members to pressure you back into compliance, what therapists call triangulation. They might tell everyone that you've changed, that you're being difficult, that something must be wrong with you. This is not evidence that you're wrong. This is evidence that your boundary landed and that they're trying everything they know to undo it. Stay steady. Don't engage in triangulated arguments. If other family members approach you on behalf of the person you're in conflict with, respond simply. This is between me and them. I'm happy to talk about anything else. Don't defend yourself extensively. Don't recruit your own allies. Just hold the line quietly and consistently. When distance becomes necessary, sometimes, despite your clearest communication and most consistent boundaries, a family member demonstrates that they are either unable or unwilling to change. And sometimes, the most honest assessment you can make is that continued close contact is causing you real harm, emotionally, psychologically, relationally. The decision to create significant distance from a family member, or in some cases, to end contact entirely, is one of the most difficult decisions a person can make. It carries grief. It carries guilt. It often carries the judgment of people who don't understand why you made it. Feel all of that. Let it be as complicated as it actually is. And if, after honest reflection, you conclude that the relationship as it currently exists is incompatible with your mental health and self-respect, make the decision anyway. You might say, either directly or through a letter, I need to take some time away from our relationship. I'm open to rebuilding something different when the dynamic changes. Until then, I need this space. That's not an attack. That's not cruelty. That is the most honest thing you can offer. A clear statement of what is and isn't working, and a genuine openness to something better, if something better becomes possible. The healing that becomes available. Here's what people who have done this hard work consistently report. Something unexpected happens when you stop absorbing the disrespect and start protecting your own dignity in family relationships. The relief is immediate, but what comes after the relief is something deeper, a reconnection with the version of yourself that existed before you learned to make yourself small in these spaces, a restoration of energy that was being silently consumed by the management of dynamics you never should have been responsible for managing. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the relationship itself begins to shift. Because when you stop participating in the old pattern, the pattern has nowhere to go. The other person either finds a new way of relating to you or they don't. But either way, you are no longer funding the dysfunction with your own well-being. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Chapter 9. Recovering your self-worth. After prolonged disrespect, there's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being consistently undervalued over a long period of time. It's not the sharp exhaustion of a single painful incident. It's something quieter and more pervasive. A heaviness that settles into the way you think about yourself, the way you move through the world, the way you automatically brace for disappointment before it even arrives. It's the exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to move without it. If you recognize that feeling, this chapter is for you. Because before we talk about commanding respect going forward, we need to talk about what prolonged disrespect actually does to a person, and more importantly, what recovery genuinely looks like. Not the inspirational poster version of recovery, the real version, the version that takes time and isn't linear and sometimes looks like 2 steps forward and 1 step back and requires more patience with yourself than you've probably been taught to offer. What prolonged disrespect actually does to you when disrespect is not an occasional incident but a sustained pattern, whether in a long-term relationship, a toxic workplace, a family system, or a combination of all three. It doesn't just hurt your feelings, it rewires things. Psychologists call it learned helplessness. It's what happens when someone is exposed repeatedly to situations where their responses don't seem to change the outcome. Over time, the brain stops generating responses. It stops trying, not because the person is weak, but because the brain is efficient. It learns the pattern and adjusts. It concludes, based on accumulated evidence, that effort doesn't change anything, and it begins to apply that conclusion far beyond the original situation. This is why people who have experienced prolonged disrespect often struggle to advocate for themselves, even in entirely new environments with entirely different people where the old rules no longer apply. They're not choosing to stay small. They've been neurologically trained towards smallness, and retraining takes intentional, sustained effort. Prolonged disrespect also creates what trauma researchers call a contaminated inner narrative, an internal voice that has absorbed the messages delivered by the disrespectful people and now delivers them independently without any external prompt. You no longer need someone to tell you that your ideas don't matter. The voice does it for you. You no longer need someone to dismiss your feelings. You dismiss them preemptively. This is perhaps the most insidious legacy of sustained mistreatment. The person who hurt you no longer needs to be present to continue hurting you. You've internalized the wound, and it keeps reopening on its own. The first step, recognition without shame. Recovery begins not with action, but with honest recognition. And that recognition needs to happen without the layer of shame that so often accompanies it. Here's what shame says about prolonged disrespect. You should have left sooner. You should have spoken up. You should have known better. What does it say about you that you allowed this? Shame frames your experience as evidence of personal failure, as though the fact that someone treated you poorly for an extended period reflects primarily on your judgment rather than on their behavior. This narrative is not just inaccurate, it is actively harmful, because it redirects your energy towards self-judgment at exactly the moment when you need that energy for healing. The truth is far more compassionate and far more accurate. People stay in disrespectful situations for deeply understandable reasons. Because the disrespect was gradual, and they adapted to each increment before they could assess the full picture. Because they loved the person, because they needed the job, because the alternative felt more frightening than the familiar discomfort, because no one had ever taught them that they were allowed to expect better. Recognizing what happened to you, clearly, honestly, without minimizing it, is the first act of self-respect in your recovery, and it needs to happen without you simultaneously putting yourself on trial for having allowed it. Identifying the beliefs that were installed. The next step is more specific and requires some courage. You need to look honestly at the beliefs about yourself that developed during the period of sustained disrespect, because those beliefs are now operating as invisible filters through which you interpret every experience. Common ones include, "My opinions aren't really worth much. I tend to overreact to things. I'm probably too demanding. People generally find me a bit too much. I don't deserve better than what I've been getting." These beliefs don't usually arrive as explicit statements. They show up as automatic assumptions. The way you immediately discount your own idea before sharing it, the way you apologize for your presence, the way you assume conflict is always somehow your fault. Write them down. Actually write them. Don't just think through them. There is something about the act of putting these beliefs on paper that creates distance between you and them. They stop being the water you swim in and start being objects you can examine. Then ask, for each one, was this belief true before the disrespectful treatment began? Where is the actual evidence that supports it? And where is the evidence that contradicts it? You are not trying to replace these beliefs with forced positivity. You are simply subjecting them to the same standard of evidence you would apply to any other claim about reality. Most of them will not survive honest examination. Creating new evidence. One of the most effective ways to rebuild self-worth is to deliberately create new experiences that contradict the old narrative. Small experiences at first, low-stakes moments where you advocate for yourself, follow through on a commitment to yourself, complete something you're proud of, or simply make a decision and trust it. Think of it like building a counterfile. The disrespectful period created a thick file of evidence for the prosecution. See, you don't deserve better. See, you can't trust your judgment. See, you're not worth the effort. Recovery involves building an equally thick file for the defense. One entry at a time, one experience at a time, one kept promise at a time. This process cannot be rushed, and its effectiveness depends entirely on you actually acknowledging the entries as you add them, rather than doing what many people in recovery instinctively do, which is to immediately minimize each small win and focus on how far there still is to go. Every time you speak up, write it down. Every time you honor your own boundary, notice it. Every time your judgment proves accurate, let yourself register that as evidence. You are building a new case. Give it the attention it deserves. The practice of self-compassion. At some point in the recovery process, often at multiple points, you are going to have a bad day, an interaction that sends you briefly back to the old patterns, a moment where the voice is loud and the ground feels unsteady and the progress you've made seems suddenly invisible. When that happens, the response that most people reach for is self-criticism. I should be past this by now. Why am I still reacting this way? What's wrong with me? This response feels productive because it looks like accountability. But it isn't. It's just another form of the same disrespect you've been trying to move away from, directed inward. Self-compassion in these moments is not softness. It is a strategic necessity, because the nervous system cannot heal in a state of chronic self-attack. The same warmth and patience you would instinctively offer a close friend going through something similar. That is what your own recovery requires from you. Talk to yourself the way you would talk to someone you genuinely love who was going through this. Not to excuse behavior that needs to change, but to create the internal safety that makes real change neurologically possible. Reconnecting with who you actually are prolonged. Disrespect has a way of erasing things, not dramatically, gradually. The interests you stopped pursuing because they were dismissed, the opinions you stopped sharing because they were met with ridicule, the parts of your personality that went quiet because they kept getting punished. Part of recovery is the deliberate work of finding those things again. What did you care about before the period of disrespect began? What made you genuinely curious, genuinely alive, genuinely yourself? Not who you were performing yourself to be, but who you actually were when no one was grading you. Go find that person. They haven't gone anywhere. They've been waiting quietly for the conditions to become safe enough to return. Your job in recovery is to keep creating those conditions through the people you choose to be around, the activities you invest in, the internal dialogue you practice, until returning to yourself feels less like an effort and more like simply coming home. What recovery actually produces here is something that consistently surprises people who do this work honestly. They don't just return to who they were before, they become something more. Because the experience of surviving prolonged disrespect, examining it honestly and choosing to rebuild, that process creates a kind of wisdom and resilience that simply cannot be manufactured any other way. You understand things about human behavior, about your own psychology, about what you genuinely need and value that you could not have understood from a position of unchallenged comfort. Your boundaries become more precise because you felt exactly what happens when they're absent. Your compassion becomes more grounded because you understand suffering from the inside. Your confidence, when it finally takes root, becomes more durable than the confidence of someone who has never had to rebuild it, because you know from experience that you can. Recovery from prolonged disrespect is not the story of returning to zero and starting over. It is the story of building something stronger on the ground that was cleared. And that story, your story, is far from finished. Chapter 10. Advanced Psychological Strategies for Command and Influence. Everything we've covered so far has been foundational, and foundation matters enormously. Without it, nothing else holds. But now we're going to go deeper. We're going to move beyond defense and into something more proactive, more sophisticated, and frankly more interesting. Because there's a difference between someone who handles disrespect well and someone who almost never encounters it in the first place. The first person has good responses. The second person has built something different entirely, a presence, a reputation, an energy that quietly communicates to every room they enter. This is someone who commands respect. And most people respond to that communication automatically, without even realizing they're doing it. That's what this chapter is about, not tactics for after disrespect happens. Positioning that makes it significantly less likely to happen at all. Respect is about perceived value, and perception can be shaped. Let's start with a truth that makes some people uncomfortable. Respect is not purely a meritocracy. It is not simply awarded to the most talented, the most qualified, or the most deserving. It is awarded, often unconsciously, to those who are perceived as valuable, competent, and confident. The key word is perceived, which means that how you present your value matters as much as the value itself. This is not about being fake. It is not about constructing a persona that doesn't reflect who you are. It is about understanding that authentic value, poorly presented, is often invisible, while clearly communicated value gets recognized and responded to. Think about two people with identical skills entering the same meeting. One speaks tentatively, qualifies every statement, laughs apologetically when challenged. The other speaks with measured confidence, holds their position under pushback, and remains comfortable in silence when they've made their point. The room will treat these two people differently, not because their actual competence differs, but because their perceived competence differs. And that perception shapes every interaction that follows. You are not changing who you are. You are learning to present who you are in a way that the world can accurately see. Social proof. Let your environment speak for you. One of the most powerful psychological principles operating in human social dynamics is social proof. The tendency to look to others for cues about how to behave in a given situation. When people who are new to you observe how existing members of your social or professional environment treat you, they use that as a template for how they should treat you too. This means that every public interaction you have is, in a sense, a broadcast. When you allow someone to dismiss you publicly and say nothing, you're broadcasting. This is acceptable here. When you address disrespect calmly and firmly in a group setting, you're broadcasting something entirely different. This person holds a standard, and that standard is consistent. The practical implication is important. Never sacrifice your standards in public settings in the name of keeping the peace. A private capitulation might affect one relationship. A public capitulation trains an entire room. Conversely, when respected people in your environment treat you with visible respect, when they defer to your expertise, seek your input, defend your contributions, that social proof becomes one of your most valuable assets. Which is why the relationships you cultivate and how you show up within them matters far beyond the individual connections themselves. The strategic use of silence. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with silence. They rush to fill it. They interpret it as disapproval or awkwardness. And in their discomfort, they say things they didn't intend to say, they over-explain, they backtrack, they offer concessions they hadn't planned to offer. People who command respect have made peace with silence. They understand that a well-placed pause is not emptiness, it is pressure. It creates space that the other person feels compelled to fill, often with exactly the kind of reflection or recalibration that changes the dynamic. After setting a boundary, go quiet. Let your words land. Don't immediately soften them with a smile or a reassurance. After making a significant point in a meeting, stop speaking and let the point exist in the room without immediately following it with justification. After asking a direct question, wait, genuinely wait, for a direct answer. Silence communicates comfort, and comfort communicates confidence, and confidence communicates that you are someone worth taking seriously. Controlled vulnerability as a credibility tool. Here's something that surprises most people. Strategically chosen vulnerability doesn't diminish your authority. Used correctly, it enhances it. When someone presents themselves as infallible, never uncertain, never wrong, never in need of input, people don't actually respect them more, they trust them less. Because infallibility isn't human, and on some level, people know that. They're waiting for the crack, the moment when the performance breaks down. But when someone with genuine competence and confidence openly acknowledges a limitation. I haven't worked extensively in this area, so I'd value your perspective. Or admits a mistake cleanly and without excessive self-flagellation. I got that wrong. Here's what I'm doing differently. Something interesting happens. Credibility goes up because now the person seems not just competent, but honest. And honesty in someone who is otherwise clearly capable is a combination that earns deep trust. The key word is controlled. You choose what to reveal, when, and to whom. You're not bleeding your insecurities in public and calling it authenticity. You're selectively sharing human moments that make your overall competence more believable and your overall character more trustworthy. Presupposition, the language of assumed respect. This is a subtle but remarkably effective linguistic technique. Presupposition means building your assumptions into the structure of what you say, rather than stating them explicitly and waiting to see if they're accepted. Compare these two approaches to someone who regularly interrupts you. Approach 1. Could you please try not to interrupt me so much? It makes it hard for me to finish my thoughts. This requests respectful treatment and implicitly acknowledges that the other person might decline. Approach 2. I'll finish this thought and then I want to hear your take. This presupposes that they will wait. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply proceeds on the assumption that the respectful behavior will occur. The second approach is not aggressive. It's not confrontational, but it operates from an entirely different frame, one where respectful treatment is the assumed default rather than something being negotiated. Over time, consistently using this kind of language reshapes the dynamic of your interactions in ways that explicit boundary setting alone cannot. Frame control, the most sophisticated tool. Of all the advanced strategies in this chapter, frame control is the most powerful and the most difficult to master. But once you understand it, you'll see it operating everywhere. A frame is the interpretive lens through which an interaction is understood. Every conversation has a frame, and whoever controls the frame controls the conversation. Most people accept whatever frame is presented to them without realizing there was a choice. People who command respect consistently maintain their own frame rather than defaulting to someone else's. Here's a simple example. Someone is consistently late to meetings with you. There are two frames available. Frame 1, their frame. They're busy. Important people have full schedules. You should be flexible. Frame 2, your frame. Your time has value, and consistency is a professional standard. If you operate from their frame, you wait patiently and feel vaguely resentful. If you operate from your frame, you say something like, I know your schedule is full. Let's make sure we protect this time so we can use it well. You've acknowledged their reality while firmly maintaining your own. You haven't been aggressive, but you've also declined to disappear into their version of events. Frame control requires you to know, clearly and in advance, what your frame actually is, what you believe about your own value, your time, your contributions. Which is why everything in the earlier chapters wasn't just emotional preparation, it was the cognitive work that makes advanced strategies like this one actually functional. Strategic scarcity, making your presence worth having. There is a fundamental principle of human psychology that applies as much to relationships as it does to economics. We value what is not infinitely available. when you are accessible to everyone at all times for any reason, when you answer every message immediately, accommodate every request, never push back on how your time and energy are used, you are not demonstrating generosity. You are demonstrating that your presence has no particular value because it costs nothing to access. Strategic scarcity is not about playing games. It's not about manufacturing unavailability to seem important. It's about genuinely being selective, about being someone who invests their time and attention in things and people that deserve it, and who is honest about the limits of that availability. When people have to earn your time, not through elaborate tests, but simply through the natural filtering of you being genuinely selective, they value it more. They arrive prepared. They engage more fully. They treat the interaction with the weight it deserves. You are not a limitless resource. Presenting yourself as one doesn't make you generous. It makes you taken for granted. Reciprocity. With discernment, the principle of reciprocity, that people feel compelled to return what they receive, is one of the most reliable forces in human social dynamics. But advanced practitioners understand something important about how to use it. Not all giving is equal. Giving something that requires your unique knowledge or skill, that demonstrates your specific competence and creates genuine value for the other person, builds a kind of reciprocal respect that generic helpfulness never achieves. When you contribute something that only you could contribute, you create a different relationship with the person receiving it. They don't just feel helped. They feel the specific shape of what you bring. This is not about withholding. It's about being intentional. Give from your strengths. Contribute what is genuinely yours to contribute. Let people experience the specific texture of your value rather than the generic texture of your availability. That experience is what stays with them. That is what builds the kind of reputation that precedes you into rooms you haven't yet entered. Chapter 11. Creating a reputation that precedes you. Imagine walking into a room where people already know how to treat you. Not because you've had to set boundaries with each of them individually, not because you've delivered carefully worded speeches about your standards, but simply because word has traveled ahead of you through interactions, through observations, through the stories people tell each other about who you are and how you operate. And that word, that reputation, has already done the work before you've said a single thing. This is not a fantasy. This is the natural result of something very specific. Living your values consistently over time in ways that other people witness and remember and talk about. Your reputation is not what you say about yourself. It's the residue of every interaction you've ever had. The pattern that emerges when someone steps back and looks at the full picture of how you show up. And when that pattern is one of consistent standards, clear values, and dignified responses to difficult situations, it becomes one of the most powerful forces working in your favor in every new context you enter. Consistency is the foundation of everything. Reputation is not built in moments of extraordinary performance. It's built in the accumulation of ordinary moments where you did what you said you would do, held the standard you said you held, and treated people the way you said people deserve to be treated. Think of it like a mosaic. No single tile makes the picture, but enough tiles, consistently placed, create something unmistakable. People don't need to have witnessed every individual tile to recognize the image. They see the pattern, and the pattern tells them what to expect. This is why inconsistency is so costly to reputation. One moment of holding your ground impresses, 10 consistent moments builds expectation. But one glaring exception, one moment where you abandon the standard everyone thought you held, introduces doubt into the entire picture. Suddenly people wonder which version of you is real. The most reputation-building thing you can do is not the dramatic gesture. It's the quiet, repeated demonstration that who you present yourself to be and who you actually are, under pressure, when no one important is watching, when it costs you something, are the same person. Every interaction is observed here is something worth sitting with. You almost never know who is watching. The way you handle a disrespectful colleague in a hallway conversation gets mentioned at dinner that night. The way you respond when your idea is taken credit for in a meeting gets remembered by everyone else in the room, not just the person who did it. The way you treat someone who can do nothing for you, a junior colleague, a service worker, a stranger, tells people something about your character that your carefully crafted professional persona never could. This is not a reason to perform constantly. Performing constantly is exhausting and eventually transparent. It's a reason to be consistent, because consistency means you don't have to think about who might be watching. You just have to be who you actually are, and let the observations accumulate into the reputation you deserve. The people who build the strongest reputations are not the ones who are always impressive in high-stakes moments. They're the ones who are reliably themselves in every moment, and whose every moment reflects the same underlying values and standards. How you handle conflict becomes your reputation. Narrative: few things reveal character as clearly as conflict, because conflict is where the gap between who we aspire to be and who we actually are tends to become visible. Under pressure, with something at stake, when someone is pushing, that's when the real shape of a person emerges. People who command deep respect are not people who avoid conflict. They're people who navigate it in ways that demonstrate both strength and integrity simultaneously. They can disagree without becoming disagreeable. They can hold firm without becoming hostile. They can address difficult behavior without making it personal. They can have the hard conversation without leaving a trail of damage behind them. When you handle a difficult situation this way, when you address disrespect calmly and effectively, when you stand your ground without losing your composure, when you say the difficult thing and remain present in the discomfort of having said it, people notice, and they talk about it. And over time, those conversations become the narrative through which others understand who you are. You want that narrative to be, this is someone who handles things well. This is someone you can trust with difficult situations. This is someone who doesn't fold under pressure and doesn't weaponize it either. That narrative, repeated enough times, becomes your reputation, and your reputation becomes the environment you walk into before you even arrive. The way you speak about others. Here is a dimension of reputation that people significantly underestimate. What you say about other people and how you say it tells everyone listening something about what you'll say about them. People who command genuine respect speak about others with fairness and precision. They distinguish between behavior and character. They acknowledge complexity rather than reducing people to single adjectives. They are willing to say difficult things when necessary, but they say them specifically, based on evidence, with the intention of clarity rather than destruction. What they don't do is participate in the ambient gossip that runs through most social and professional environments like background noise. Not because they're naive about human nature, they often understand it better than anyone, but because they recognize that every time you tear someone else down in conversation, you're also telling the person you're speaking to, I will do this to you too, when you're not in the room. The most trusted people in any environment are the ones whose discretion is known and reliable, who you can share something real with and trust that it won't become currency in someone else's conversation. That discretion is not just a kindness. It is a cornerstone of the kind of reputation that makes people genuinely want to be in your corner. How you handle success and failure, both ends of the performance spectrum, offer reputation-defining moments that most people mishandle. Success handled poorly, with arrogance, with the implicit message that the outcome was inevitable because of how exceptional you are, doesn't build respect. It builds resentment. And resentment is reputation poison that takes years to clear. Success handled well looks like acknowledging contribution without false modesty, celebrating outcomes without diminishing the people who shared in creating them, and moving quickly from "look what we achieved" to "here's what comes next." It communicates, I'm confident enough in my own value that I don't need this moment to define me. And that confidence is far more impressive than the achievement itself. Failure handled poorly, with blame, with defensiveness, with the elaborate construction of reasons why the outcome was someone else's fault, is perhaps even more costly, because how someone handles failure tells you everything about whether they can be trusted with real responsibility. Failure handled well looks like clean ownership. I made the wrong call there. Here's what I missed, and here's what I'm doing differently. No excessive self-flagellation. No performance of humility designed to generate reassurance. Just clear accountability and forward movement. This is rare enough to be remarkable, and remarkable enough to be remembered. Digital presence as reputation extension. Your online presence is now an undeniable part of your reputation, and it is often the first impression you make on people who will encounter you in person later. The same standards apply. Don't engage in public arguments that produce heat without light. Don't post in anger and call it authenticity. Don't use digital platforms to air grievances that should be addressed privately. Don't participate in pile-ons, even when the target seems to deserve it. What your digital presence should communicate is the same thing your physical presence communicates. Here is someone who thinks clearly, engages honestly, maintains standards without self-righteousness, and treats the space they occupy, virtual or otherwise, with the same integrity they bring everywhere else. Your online behavior is visible to people who will hire you, collaborate with you, and decide whether to trust you long before they've met you in person. Make sure what they find there is consistent with the reputation you're building everywhere else. The long game building, a reputation that genuinely precedes you, is a long game. There are no shortcuts, and there is no hacking it. You cannot manufacture it through self-promotion or force it through image management. The only way to build it is to live it, consistently over time, in public and in private, in high-stakes moments and in ordinary ones. But here's what makes the long game worth playing. Once a strong reputation is established, it compounds. Each new person who hears about you before meeting you arrives with a positive frame. Each new room you enter has already been prepared in some measure by the rooms that came before. The work you did yesterday reduces the work you have to do today, and the work you do today reduces the work you'll have to do tomorrow. At a certain point, your reputation stops being something you manage and starts being something that simply travels with you, doing quietly in advance. What used to require deliberate effort every single time, that is the reward for consistency. That is what it looks like when the long game pays off. Chapter 12. The Mindset of Someone Who Never Tolerates Disrespect. We've covered a lot of ground together. We've talked about recognizing disrespect in its subtlest forms. We've explored the psychology behind why people behave the way they do. We've built a toolkit of responses, strategies, and approaches for every type of situation and every type of person. We've gone deep into confidence, into family dynamics, into recovery, into reputation. But all of that, every single chapter, every strategy, every reframe, has been leading here to this final and most important conversation, because all the techniques in the world are ultimately just scaffolding. What they're built around, what gives them their structure and their staying power, is a way of seeing yourself and the world that makes disrespect not just something you handle well, but something that increasingly struggles to find a foothold in your life at all. This is the mindset of someone who never tolerates disrespect, and it is available to you, not as a personality trait you either have or don't, but as a way of being that you can build, practice, and eventually inhabit so fully that it stops feeling like something you're working at and starts feeling like simply who you are. Worth that doesn't require external confirmation. At the center of this mindset is something deceptively simple, a knowledge of your own worth that does not depend on anyone else's recognition of it. This sounds straightforward. Most people would say they believe in their own worth. But watch what happens when someone dismisses their idea. Do they immediately begin to doubt it? Watch what happens when someone treats them coldly. Do they immediately begin to wonder what they did wrong? Watch what happens when they're excluded from something. Do they begin to construct reasons why they probably weren't good enough to be included anyway? Those responses are not evidence of low self-worth as a belief. They're evidence of self-worth that is still tethered to external validation. And tethered self-worth is fragile self-worth because the tether can be pulled at any moment by anyone who chooses to pull it. Untethered self-worth doesn't mean being impervious to feedback or indifferent to connection or closed to growth. It means having a stable core sense of your own value that remains intact, regardless of what any individual interaction produces. It means being able to receive criticism without collapsing, dismissal without deflating, exclusion without catastrophizing. Think of it like a tree in wind. The branches move significantly, sometimes dramatically, but the root system holds. The tree doesn't fall because the wind is strong. It bends, it adjusts, it weathers the storm. And when the wind passes, it is still standing, still rooted, still itself. That root system is what this entire guide has been helping you build. Every chapter has been adding depth to the roots. This one is about understanding what the fully rooted version of you actually looks and feels like, so you have something concrete to move toward. Disrespect as information, not verdict. One of the most transformative shifts in this mindset is the way it relates to other people's behavior. When someone is disrespectful, the untrained response is to receive it as a verdict, as data about your worth, your likability, your standing. The question that immediately arises is, what does this say about me? The mindset of someone who never tolerates disrespect asks an entirely different question. What does this say about them? Not from a place of superiority or dismissiveness, from a place of genuine psychological understanding, because you've done the work. You read chapter 3. You know what drives disrespectful behavior. You understand that it is always a reflection of the other person's inner state, never an accurate assessment of your value. When you truly internalize this, something remarkable happens to your emotional experience of disrespect. It stops landing in the same place. Instead of hitting the part of you that is vulnerable and self-questioning, it lands in the part of you that is observant and strategic. Instead of asking, "Am I enough?" you find yourself asking, "What's happening for them right now?" And from that position, you can respond with clarity rather than reactivity. This is emotional immunity, not the kind that comes from building walls, but the kind that comes from having such a solid foundation that external turbulence simply cannot reach the core. Expectations shape reality. Here is something subtle but profound about the mindset of people who consistently command respect. They expect to be respected, not in an entitled or demanding way, but as a simple baseline assumption about how their interactions will go. And that expectation, held internally, expressed through posture and tone, and the way they move through spaces, communicates itself to others in ways that are below conscious awareness, but entirely felt. Consider the difference between someone who enters a room braced for dismissal, already slightly apologetic, already slightly diminished, and someone who enters a room simply assuming they'll be received as a capable, worthwhile person. The words they say might be identical, but the rooms will respond to them differently, because people don't just respond to what you say. They respond to the frame you carry it in. Your expectations of how you'll be treated are part of your communication, whether you intend them to be or not. Begin practicing the expectation of respect, not as a demand, but as a quiet assumption. The way you'd assume the lights will come on when you flip the switch, not something you feel grateful for, just the natural state of things. Boundaries that feel natural rather than effortful. People in the early stages of learning to set boundaries describe the experience as uncomfortable, effortful, sometimes frightening. They have to psych themselves up for the conversation. They replay it afterward, wondering if they said the right thing. They feel guilty for days. People who have fully inhabited this mindset describe boundary setting entirely differently. It feels as natural as stepping out of the rain, not a confrontation, just a simple, obvious movement toward what is true for them and away from what isn't. This shift happens because the boundary is no longer coming from a place of defending against attack. It's coming from a place of simply living in alignment with who you are. You're not fighting for your worth. You already know it. You're just making practical adjustments to ensure your environment reflects it. The effort dissolves when the need to prove anything dissolves. When you no longer need the other person to agree that you deserve better. When you simply know it and act accordingly, boundaries stop being battles and start being natural expressions of both self-respect. Energy freed for creation. One of the most underappreciated gifts of this mindset is what it does with your energy. Think about how much mental and emotional bandwidth gets consumed in a life where disrespect is a regular feature. The replaying of difficult interactions, the anxiety before encounters with certain people, the recovery time after being dismissed or undermined, the strategic thinking about how to protect yourself, the grief of relationships that drain more than they nourish. All of that energy has a destination in a life where disrespect rarely lands and is quickly resolved when it does. It goes toward building things, creating things, pursuing the goals and relationships and experiences that actually matter to you. The absence of chronic emotional drain is not just relief, it is fuel. People who truly inhabit this mindset often describe a sense of expansion, like a room that's been cluttered for years, suddenly cleared. The same hours exist in their day, but the quality of attention available within those hours is entirely different, and what becomes possible in that attention is remarkable. The magnetic effect. Something interesting happens to the social landscape of someone who has genuinely adopted this mindset. Disrespectful people, the boundary testers, the energy drainers, the chronic manipulators, tend to drift away. Not always dramatically, often just gradually, quietly, as they encounter consistent resistance and find easier targets elsewhere. The environment that once tolerated them has changed, and they sense it without being able to articulate exactly what changed. And into the space they leave, different people arrive. People who are drawn to the clarity and warmth and groundedness of someone who knows themselves well. People who find that kind of company genuinely enlivening. People who, because they operate from a similar place of self-respect, create the conditions for genuine connection rather than the transactional dynamics that characterize so many relationships built on imbalance. This is the magnetic effect. You stop attracting what you tolerate and start attracting what you reflect. And what you reflect, when you've done this work, is someone worth knowing deeply over time, in the ways that actually matter. The practice that never ends. Let's be completely honest about one thing before we close. This mindset is not a destination you arrive at and then maintain without effort. It is a practice, ongoing, imperfect, requiring your continued attention and recommitment, especially in the moments when old patterns try to reassert themselves, which they will. There will be interactions that shake you, people who find the old tender spot and press on it more skillfully than you expected. There will be days when the voice of self-doubt is louder than the foundation you've built. There will be moments where you wish you'd responded differently, where the gap between who you're becoming and who you were feels suddenly very wide. In those moments, this is what you return to, the practice, not the performance of confidence, but the quiet, deliberate recommitment to treating yourself with the same respect you're learning to require from others. Because ultimately, that is what all of this is about. Not the strategies, not the responses, not the reputation or the influence or the techniques for handling difficult personalities. It's about the relationship you have with yourself. Every boundary you set is a statement to yourself about your worth. Every disrespect you refuse to absorb is a vote for the version of you that knows better. Every moment you choose clarity over accommodation, honesty over performance, self-respect over approval, you are building something, not just a skill set, a self. And that self, grounded, clear-eyed, warm but uncompromising, fully present and fully intact, is the person the world will learn to treat accordingly, not because you demanded it, because you demonstrated it every single day in the thousand small choices that add up to a life. That is the mindset of someone who never tolerates disrespect, and it has always been available to you.